Nobody, I was a lone voice warning about the problems. And ultimately, almost all my predictions have now come true. And unfortunately, there's a few more that are still going to come true. But the point is, I understand these problems. And more importantly, I understand the cause. The cause is not the free market. It's not greed on Wall Street. You know, when George Bush made his speech late in his presidency, he said that Wall Street got drunk. Well, yeah, Wall Street was drunk. Main Street was drunk. The entire country was drunk. That's not the problem. The question is, why? Where'd they get all the alcohol? They got it from the government. They got it from the Federal Reserve. I understood how monetary policy was distorting market forces, how government regulations and fiscal policy was distorting the economy, was creating the moral hazards, led to conditions of wild and rampant speculation on Wall Street and excessive consumption on Main Street. It was government interference with the market that caused the problem. Not a lack of regulation, but an excess of regulation. And so I want to go to Washington and change that before they do any more damage. You see, when they talk about stimulating the economy, they're not stimulating the economy. They're stimulating the problems in the economy. They're stimulating the government. They're actually sedating the economy. The more they stimulate the economy, the weaker the economy is going to get. The more bills that they have to create jobs, the more jobs they're going to destroy. See, we don't create jobs by passing legislation. Right? We create jobs through profits, through capital. But unfortunately, the government is waging war on these days, and we're losing our jobs. You see, we stimulate our way into this crisis. When the NASDAQ bubble burst back in 2002, and you know, when I first got my start in this business, it was warning about the NASDAQ bubble. I've been working in the investment business pretty much my whole life, but I worked for some major firms before I started my own company. I got hired by a firm called Drexel Burnham, and a week before I started my job, they went out of business. And then I worked for another company, Lehman Brothers, and they went bankrupt last year. But I worked there long enough to know I didn't like it, and I started my own business. I didn't think retail investors were getting a fair shake. So I wanted to give out good advice, not the advice that my firm wanted me to give out. So I started my own business, and I was working out of my one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles. But one of the earliest things I did as a stockbroker, cold calling individual investors, was warning them about a stock market bubble, about a bubble in the NASDAQ and a bubble in the internet. And I knew that was going to collapse and it was going to wipe out a lot of people. And it was difficult because when I was cold calling people, no one wanted to hear that. Everybody wanted to hear about the next internet stock that would make them rich. I didn't want to tell people what they wanted to hear. I wanted to tell them what they had to hear. And that's the problem with politicians. They don't want to tell the truth. They don't want to level with the public because they want to get reelected. Somebody's got to tell them the truth. And I did that. And when I saw the NASDAQ bubble burst, I knew that we were going to have a pretty big recession as a result of that. Because the recessions actually cure the mistakes we make during the boom. It's the boom that's the problem. The recession is where we cure the problem. But the government didn't allow the recession to run its course. They stimulated the economy. With cheap money, the Fed brought interest rates down to 1%, and we cranked up the deficits, and we stimulated our way out of the NASDAQ bubble right into the housing bubble. And we created a much bigger problem than the one we pretended to solve. Unfortunately, we're doing the same thing now. Barack Obama and Ben Bernanke are repeating all the mistakes of Alan Greenspan and George Bush, only worse. Monetary policy now is even more reckless than it was then. And fiscal policy is more reckless. So we are sowing the seeds of a much greater disaster that's going to hit this country maybe in 2011 or 2012. It's going to take the form of a currency crisis where the value of the dollar collapses, and that's going to wipe out the middle class. Their wages are going to lose value. Their savings are going to lose value. Prices and interest rates are going to run out of control. And there'll be twice as many people unemployed as there are now. So we need to do something, and we need to do something about it soon. Now we need to send somebody to Washington that's actually committed to these principles. Right? Because none of the politicians are. There are a lot of people now that are saying the right thing. I mean, they're talking the talk, but the bottom line is they're not going to walk the walk when they get to Washington because all they care about is getting elected. I have been an advocate of these principles my entire life. Right? When I was in college, I had a poster of Ronald Reagan in my dorm room at UC Berkeley. And which didn't win me any points, because I'd bring women up there in the evening and it would screw up the whole mood. But I was thinking these things back then. And a lot of people now are talking against the bailouts. Well, where were they when the bailouts were going? I was on national TV practically every day against the TARP, saying that we should have let these firms fail, saying to let AIG fail when they were still voting to bail them out. Where were the people who were criticizing the stimulus when Bush was doing it? I was on national television criticizing the first stimulus under George Bush and criticizing the Republicans who voted for it. A lot of people are talking about it now because it's politically popular. But how do you trust their motivations? I'm only motivated by one thing. I'm not going to Washington because I want a new career, because I want to be in politics. I don't want to be in politics. I wish I didn't have to go. I mean, that's one of the reasons you know for sure that I'm not going to try to get reelected, because I don't really even want to get elected in the first place. But I understand that the economy is a mess and that professional politicians have screwed it up, and they're never going to solve these problems. Because to them, the only problem is how to get reelected. That's not my problem. I figure the term in the Senate is 6 years. I got 6 years to turn this country around. If I can't do it in 6 years, it's too late. We can't keep doing this for 6 years. We've got to convince somebody with credibility and a track record has to go to Washington and bang some sense into these clowns and get them to understand that they are the source of our problem. They are listening to the wrong people. They're listening to the Ben Bernanke's, they're listening to the Timothy Geithners, who have never gotten anything right in their entire careers. And they're listening to Wall Street, they're listening to Goldman Sachs. Right? They're not going to be able to fool me when I'm there. I can explain. See, these guys, they don't care about the country. They care about themselves. They are bleeding the country dry. They are siphoning the wealth out of the country so that they can make a profit. That has to come to an end. Someone has to be there to educate these guys, because they don't understand anything about economics. They believe whatever they're told. And if someone sells them a bill of goods, they buy it. I can tell them the truth, and I can do it in a way that will make sense. And hopefully, I can go to the Senate and lead a revolution in the Republican Party and in the entire Senate, and get people to understand that Washington is not the solution to our problems, but the source of our problems. And the only way the country is ever going to grow is if we can get a hold of Washington and shrink it. The only real economic stimulus would be less government. And it doesn't just mean lower taxes, it means less regulations. I mean, I experienced firsthand what government regulations do. I'm in the securities business. Right? I said I started my business out of my one-bedroom apartment. I had one employee. Even as late as 2000, I had one employee working for me. Now I have over 100. Right? I've got 6 offices. I have about $2 billion in customer accounts, my brokerage firm. I have a registered investment advisor. I manage a mutual fund. I do investment banking. I grew all that from a one-man operation 10 years ago. But you know what? I couldn't do it again. There's no way, if the rules and regulations that exist today existed back then, I never could have got started. It would have been physically impossible for me to do it. I mean, right now I have 7 employees. 7. The only thing these guys do is comply with government rules and regulations. And it's a complete waste of money and waste of time, and it's not doing anything to protect my clients. My clients are protected by my own desire to maintain my reputation in the marketplace. These guys are doing nothing but gumming up the works, costing me money. They didn't do anything. They didn't ferret out Bernie Madoff. He still pulled off that giant Ponzi scheme. These regulations don't do anything. Plus, they run up my accounting bills, my legal bills. My lawyer, I pay in legal bills more than I used to earn 10 years ago. By just my legal bills. And it's not because I'm having problems with my customers. I'm not. It's because of what I have to do just to comply with all the rules and regulations that they keep throwing on top of me. And now they want to regulate the financial service industry even more, as if it isn't regulated enough. And there are a lot of other small businessmen that are struggling with the same problem. They're struggling with the rules and regulations. If you try to employ somebody in this country, they immediately vilify you. You're an enemy if you have an employee. And if you have to fire somebody, look out. You can get sued a million different ways. So we've got to, get rid of all of these roadblocks to job creation and economic growth. And we've got to understand that if we're running a budget deficit, the government now is borrowing $1.6 trillion this year. Right? For every dollar the government collects in taxes, it's spending $1.60. I don't even know how you can even call that a budget. How you can deliberately set out to spend 60% more than you earn is beyond me. But what is the cost of all that deficit spending? Where's that money coming from? That's the money that businesses would have had to expand. They're